hit you with 3 legs of an NBA parlay coming up, but come on. Just be happy I'm not doing an MLB video today. It would just be me talking about game 1 the entire time. I was tempted to do that. 5 thoughts in 5 minutes, not on the NBA, but last night's World Series win. Well, it's only 1 game, Shander. Shut the hell up. Get to the NBA. Okay. You first, though. Hit the thumbs up button. Let's subscribe. Let's do all that so that you're part of here, the Odd Shopper community. We are going to build this parlay for you as we do 6 days a week for you here. And we also have that $10 to $200 on BetMGM. So you better believe it that I'm going to keep reminding you about that. The first leg is the first game. So jump on now because today is the day, folks. That's right. 10-29-22 market. Today is the day in which the Sacramento Kings win their first game. And we talked about this on the Leans and Locks last night. Appreciate you rolling with us there. How the Kings have a really good opportunity right now, specifically right now, this game, these sets of circumstances that are working in their favor. And I really think that Miami playing their 3rd game in their 4th night, the Kings bench just outplaying Miami on a nightly basis, outscoring them by nearly 10 points. And Miami's gassed this game. This is the best time to catch a team snoozing. And I think the Heat look up at the schedule and they say, we got 82 of these guys. Like, do we really need to exert all of our energy to beat the Kings? Probably not. And that's when you get NFL'd. It's not often in a sport like the NBA where 1 or 2 guys throughout the night can dictate a game each and every week, or night in this case. But that's when you get NFL'd, where it's just like, nah, man, we don't need, come on. And then you look up and you're down by 6. And there's a minute left on the clock and you're like, what the hell just happened here? Now, it could even be worse, but we're just going to tempt a little tempt of fate here and take that first run here, the Kings plus 140. So here's what you can do. We're going to get you 2 more legs today, all right? But before that, sorry, I can't help myself. If you just want to play that, that's fine. If you just want to play the Kings on the money line, I'm going to get you $200. So this is what you do. Click that link below. It's going to bring you right back to BetMGM, right? Now you're on BetMGM and sign up, put your info in. It's really easy. From there, deposit just $10. That's all you really need here is just to deposit $10. Don't worry about 500,000 bankroll, all that. $10. Then immediately, I wouldn't wait because you cannot take advantage of this deal if your money is there in your account, but you haven't placed the bet. If the deal is gone and you signed up, you did all that, but you didn't bet, sorry, there's nothing I can do for you. So just do it right away. Just sign up, put in the $10, punch the ticket right there, take the Kings $10 on the money line because it's going to turn into 200 so long as a guy hits a 3, which is going to happen like right away. So you might as well jump in now with this BetMGM deal before it goes away because, as you can tell, they're just giving away money. And then from there, you're golden. You're golden, $200 in your bank account, and you're all set. All right, let's keep it moving here. Kyrie's in a heap load of trouble or issue or what have you, and the Nets are laying 10.5 at home. It's an interesting proposition, as are the Bulls, even money against the Sixers team that comes off a humongous victory, and we anticipate Joel Embiid playing. I'll take the Bulls. Now, this is a wait and see. If Zach LaVine is officially out and Joel Embiid is officially in, I would stop and I would just take the Nets instead, the Pacers instead at plus 10.5. I think the Nets right now are in trouble on the floor and off the floor. And that's a recipe for a bad team, double-digit spread to slide in there. For me personally, it's 105, which indicates that money's coming in right on the Sixers. Now, that could just be Embiid's playing, which is fine. If Embiid and LaVine are playing, I'm good here. I'm good. If Embiid's out and LaVine's in, I'm good here. If Embiid is in and LaVine is out, that's it. We go back to that Nets game. But Philadelphia, here's the thing about the Sixers win last night. It was very team specific. This was a Raptors team in the same spot, mind you, that just kicked their ass. And you knew watching that first game that the talent gap is not anywhere near that wide for the Raptors and the Sixers. So another crack at Toronto, absolutely. Here's the other thing. They play different, much different. Let me be careful here because I don't want somebody to be like, in the chat, you said no. They play different without Embiid. Doesn't mean they're better. Doesn't mean they're worse. I don't care what record, metrics, all the other data. There is just a different, and how could there not be? You're taking an MVP or an MVP caliber player out of a rotation. You also have a lot of talent on that floor. It just funnels differently. And that's where I think Embiid coming back isn't just and they get Embiid back. No. Things change, and you have to relearn how to win this year with Embiid on the floor, as they've been trying to do. Only one with him on the floor. By the way, Phillies over team total, that's a lock. Just letting you know. I'm here giving you, I can't help it, just giving and giving and giving and giving. Speaking of giving, before we get that final leg in here, can I just please remind you about the access? The insider access is here. ES Insider is the coupon code. Remember, told you, this is this week. This week, a couple days ago. Now, 5-5 yesterday, a little regrettable, but we're giving out these same game parlays. We're giving out crazy shit. Ivy League football, Yale hits again. Thank you, Yale football. That was given out on the Discord on Friday. Tyrese Maxey over 2.5. I gave it on the Discord. I knew if I gave it on the video, y'all would just leave. So I gave it on the Discord. And you know what? The guy hit, 15?
What is happening, everybody? It's time for another Stokastic NFL Tournament Strategy show. While you come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, because for the next hour or so of the show, we're going to have myself and Neil Orfield, former and always Millionaire Maker winner, also one of the top showdown players that we have in DFS right now. We're going to break down all of our favorite tournament angles for week 8 of the NFL season. It's gone fast, Neil. We're already like halfway through the season. But how are you feeling about this weekend slate?
Feeling good about it. It's an interesting one. We're missing a lot of the top quarterbacks on the slate. We don't have a lot of high-end options to pay up for, which means that maybe it's more reasonable to play some of these middle-end options. So I'm liking the slate.
Yeah, and we have also, we're gonna start right here as per usual at the quarterback. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is the highest stack score we've had ever in the top stacks tool. And if anybody at home wants to guess, I'll give you guys a beat to try to figure out which team it is. If you guys follow Alex on Twitter, you've probably heard him mention it also. But the highest stack score that I have ever seen, I've never seen a team with a perfect 100. Have you ever seen this, Neil?
Good question. I don't think so.
So we'll reveal it to the people now, because the answer is the Miami Dolphins going up against the Detroit Lions. So Tua Tagovailoa and his pass catchers, we have this as being an outstandingly good stack. Tua's pretty reasonably priced. The Detroit Lions defense, horrific. Not just as a defense, but particularly against the pass. And we've seen Miami, when Tua is healthy, they throw the ball a ton. And they also throw the ball a lot, some shorter routes to Waddle, to Tyreek Hill. So there's a lot of PPR points to be had. I love getting into this stack, even if it wasn't me just looking at the tools and seeing how well it rates out. So despite all the ownership going to Tua, it looks more than warranted. How are you going to handle the Dolphins in large field tournaments starting with Tua?
I'm going to play them. I'm going to be playing a lot of this Miami stack against the Dolphins. I saw somebody point out on Twitter, maybe Josh Larkey, pointed out that Tua only has one game this year so far where he has multiple touchdowns. I don't really care about that stat. I mean, he hasn't played every game, but also small sample size. He hasn't had a matchup. There aren't any other matchups as good as the Detroit secondary. So I'm going to be playing a lot of the Dolphins, as you can see in the top stacks tool, coming in at 14.4% projected ownership, 19.2% chance to be in the top stack on the board. I'm going to get to a lot of it. I'm going to be well over the field, I think.
And the other thing, too, is Tua's been he's been good this year. We've seen the upside, but I think he's been better than people even realize, because some of the matchups that he's had, like, for instance, the game against the Bills, number one, he clearly had a concussion in that game. The NFL found that out after the fact. The Bills also are number one overall in defensive DVOA. The game against the Bengals, he gets hurt early in that game as well, gets knocked out, doesn't get to finish. So some of the games we've actually seen him play to completion, the game against the New England Patriots, 270 passing yards, over 8 yards per pass attempt, and the game was a blowout, so there wasn't a need for him to throw the ball a whole bunch in the fourth quarter. The game against the Ravens, really the one back and forth competitive game we've seen the Dolphins in all year. 36 of 50 passing, 469 yards, 6 touchdowns. To the point you made before also about how you don't care about the small sample size. I don't either, because it's not like he hasn't shown upside. It's not like the one time that he threw for more than one touchdown pass, he had 2. He threw for 6 touchdowns in that game and 469 yards. I think that really, without a doubt, unless something drastic was to change, Tua is going to be my most rostered quarterback, and the Dolphins are by far going to be my most stacked team.
Yeah, no, I think I am on the same page as you. Usually I set my ownership cap on quarterbacks, and it changes every week, but similar to how I play Show Nice, I set like a 20% cap on quarterbacks just because I want to spread it out a little bit, because your quarterback really changes the, when you're stacking games, it really changes the entire construction of your roster. So I like to spread it out. I'll probably still set it at 20%. Maybe I'll give a little bit of a higher cap on Tua, but yeah, he's probably going to be, tied maybe with some other people, but he's certainly going to be in that group that is my highest owned quarterback as well.
Yeah, and something else that influences it, and you brought it up at the top when we were introing the slate in the show, is that we don't really have a lot of the high-end quarterbacks this weekend. We've got Jalen Hurts as the most expensive QB on the slate. Then there's Kyler Murray in the next tier. And then you're just kind of getting into the 6K range. So in terms of opportunity cost, it's not like we're sacrificing Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, all these guys to get to Tua. But then what does that make you think of the high end at quarterback, where we've got guys like Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray? They're kind of on an island of their own in terms of pricing. How are you going to approach the real pay up options at QB in tournaments?
So they are also among my highest owned quarterbacks, the quarterbacks I'm going to be playing the most. I really like Jalen Hurts. I'll probably be single stacking with Jalen Hurts, coming in at 7.7% projected ownership, 10.7% chance of being the top stack in Philly. I don't think you necessarily need to double stack Hurts because of that rushing upside, but I'm going to be getting to a lot of Hurts. It's a decent matchup against a pretty bad Pittsburgh defense. So yeah, sign me up for all the Jalen Hurts. And then Kyler Murray now is playing against the Vikings. The Cardinals have a 22.75 implied team total. The Vikings are bad on defense. Not bad overall. Great team, but the defense has not been great this year. 21st in terms of pass DVOA, 21st in terms of rush DVOA. Kyler has shown some rushing upside in some games this year when he needs to. And I think this is a game where the Cardinals are going to have to be trying to keep up with the Vikings. So I really like Kyler Murray as well in a payout spot. So yeah, I guess those are the two real pay up options. And I like both of them. I think both of them are also going to be among my highest owned quarterbacks.
Yeah, so from the high end to the low end, and then we'll talk about the players in between in a second as well. But Sam Ehlinger is picking up some ownership. He is extremely cheap on both DraftKings and FanDuel. So I think a lot of people will probably be playing him naked and just saying like, hey, if I get a serviceable game out of him at quarterback, he opens up all this salary to go be able to roster whoever he wanted skill position players. What are you going to be doing with Sam Ehlinger? Because we do have a weird split here where if you look at the top stacks tool, we don't project the Colts with a very high likelihood of being one of the top scoring offenses. We only have them with a 2% chance to be a top stack. But when you look in the boom bust tool, because Ehlinger is so cheap, he's only projected for 5% ownership on DK with a 10% chance to be optimal. And then over on FanDuel as well, he also is somebody who rates out as being positive leverage just because he's so cheap and he opens up other opportunities elsewhere. So what are you going to do? Because we just don't typically get min price starting quarterbacks.
Yeah, so I think we can start by saying I think Sam Ehlinger is a pretty clear cash game option, and he's probably the like small field GPPs. He looks great. You don't necessarily need to stack him. I think I'm going to be playing a lot of Sam. My guess is that I will be playing around 20% of Sam Ehlinger as well. He's going to be in that group of my favorite quarter. Maybe not 20%. We currently have projected for 4.9% projected ownership. Typically, I do prefer to stack my quarterbacks. Like that's it's just a correlation piece that you take out some of the guesswork from your lineup. I think with Sam Ehlinger, I'm not going to, I think it's Ehlinger, right? Hard G. I'm not going to require the stack, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give boost to his wide receivers so that in maybe 2/3 of my lineups, I would prefer to have an indie receiver when I have Ehlinger in the lineup, but I'm not going to require, this is one of those rare spots where I am willing to run a quarterback out there naked. And then maybe you just find different correlations within that lineup. If you're hand building, just, make sure you're correlating some of your wide receivers, you're maybe correlating your maybe the spot where you correlate your defense with your running back. Try to find some other correlations within your lineup if you are not stacking Sam Ehlinger, because you do still want those. And I'm trying to decide if that actually makes sense any more so than usual, like, because it always makes sense to correlate somewhat. The correlation doesn't really change, but just because of the price savings, because he allows you to get to constructions that no other quarterbacks get to, I am willing to play him without the stack. But I think that in general, because I'm going to be giving boosts to the Indy pass catchers in lineups that have Sam Ehlinger at quarterback, I'm going to have more often I'm going to be stacked there. Do you think you're going to be playing any Ehlinger naked, or do you think you're going to be stacking him, if at all, I guess?
Man, it's tough. My inclination right now is to not play him, especially if he's going to end up picking up ownership tomorrow. And I think that's really going to be key to me is what does his ownership ultimately end up looking like? Because right now we do have him at 5% ownership. It's not a ton, but it's not nothing either. I do get concerned that the ownership gets steamed by the time we get to tomorrow. And the reality is he probably sucks, right? We don't. It's hard to really say we know that much about him because there's no real data on him. This is going to be his first NFL start. He hasn't taken any snaps this year. There's no pass attempts. But what separates, say, like Sam Ehlinger versus what we would have thought of like PJ Walker a couple weeks ago? Like, are they really that much different, or is it just like, hey, a new guy? Like, what do you think it is about him that makes it so people are at least apparently willing to play him, and even at such a cheap price when we have had other cheap quarterbacks that haven't picked up ownership?
Well, was PJ Walker 4,000? Was he the minimum? I mean, I guess that's the first question is, was he the minimum? But also, Adam Levitan tweeted this out about the preseason. So it's not the same as an NFL game, as a regular season NFL game, but I still think it's worth looking at. So Levitan pointed out, Sam Ehlinger has played 137 NFL preseason snaps, roughly 2 full games worth. In those 2 full games, essentially, his rushing line is 17 rushes for 126 yards and a touchdown. He's also completed 75% of passes, for what that's worth. But it's the rushing upside for me. Like, PJ Walker hasn't really shown that rushing upside. I think that Ehlinger is more likely to get there without a stack than a guy like PJ Walker, just because he has shown that rushing upside.
Walker was 4,800 in his first start, so a little bit more expensive, but still a very cheap price. And it's not like anybody was talking about him at that point in time too. But my gut feeling is that Ehlinger is going to end up being owned, just because I have seen him getting talked about a decent amount. So it's going to depend to me on what the ownership looks like. But my preference would be to just stack more at QB. And it's not a position we need to save salary at. The quarterbacks are not expensive. There's a lot of cheap QBs to get to. We just talked about Tua, who's one of the more expensive quarterbacks on the slate, and it's not at a prohibitive price point, right? He's in the 6K range today. But let's talk about the other quarterbacks in the mid-range, because on the high end, we've talked about liking the pay up options. In the kind of more middle range, our favorite option overall is going to be Tua. But who are the other options that are standing out to you as also being really strong quarterbacks to build some stacks around?
Yeah, so we talked about how much I like Kyler Murray. I like the other side of that game too. Kirk Cousins looks great against this Cardinals defense. They're 27th in terms of pass DVOA so far this year per Football Outsiders. So at 6,100, I'm really going to like Kirk Cousins. We have him coming in currently at 7.5% projected ownership, 14% chance of the Vikings being the top stack on the board. I know Arizona's been better against wide receiver ones than wide receiver twos and elsewhere, but I'm still willing to play Justin Jefferson against anybody. That's not going to scare me off Justin Jefferson. So he'll be a part of my Minnesota stacks, some of my Minnesota stacks. I also, if you want to buy into that narrative that they're better against wide receiver ones, well, they're still getting eaten alive by passing games. So you can go to Adam Thielen too as a great pass catching option. And then at tight end, they've been pretty bad against tight end as well. So Irv Smith makes a lot of sense. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. I mean, I just named, I guess, 3 players. So not that many different combos there, but there are different ways to split up this Vikings stack. And I'm going to be splitting them up in a lot of different ways. I really like Kirk Cousins and the Vikings offense. You look at the top stacks tool, Stafford and the Rams look pretty incredible. 1.8% projected ownership for Stafford, 8.3% chance of being the top stack on the board. I'm really going to like that spot. Stafford is only 6,000, again, relatively cheap. The Rams have a 20.25 implied team total. They're facing a pretty good Niners defense, but I think it's an offense that's capable of, putting up some fantasy points against pretty much any defense. And again, you can stack Stafford with Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee. Van Jefferson is back. He's a guy who always has fantasy upside, and he's really cheap. So a lot of ways to do that. Ram stack, same price range, just $100 cheaper. Derek Carr is 5,900. The Raiders have a 25.5 implied team total going up against the Saints defense that is 20th against the pass. hard not to like Derek Carr with all of his pass catching weapons. And then the only other player that I had listed that I want to talk about is Dak Prescott against this Bears defense. Natural leverage on the Tony Pollard ownership, and you can also pair Dak Prescott with Tony Pollard. Probably not a lot of people are going to be doing that. The Cowboys have a 25.25 implied team total against the Bears defense that is 12th against the pass, so doing pretty well against the pass, but 24th against the rush. Cowboys are expected to put up some fantasy points, so hard not to like Dak. We have the Cowboys coming in at 3% projected ownership, 3.5% chance of being the top stack on the board. Do you agree with those call outs and any others that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so the one I really wanted to ask you about was the Rams, and it's a team that you and I think both, we've talked about them a few times being a low-owned team to get to over the last few weeks, and it generally hasn't gone well. Cooper Kupp is getting his, but everybody else on the team has kind of been miserable as of late, and particularly Matt Stafford. I definitely think that coming into the year, there was the narrative that he had the elbow injury. I have to think that's playing a factor at this point in the year, but he's only 1.8% owned right now on DraftKings. He's 2% owned on FanDuel. That is worth taking a shot on still. And that's the thing too. I see some of these games from Matt Stafford's like, I don't want anything to do with this guy anymore. He's terrible. And the ownership goes down lower and lower each week. And it makes it to a point where it's like, well, I'm still willing to play him at 1% ownership. So I don't know what would his ownership go to from here if he continues to suck. Like, it's going to be negative 5% on 3 weeks from now. So it's just, we're at a point where the ownership is so low, and there are still talented weapons around him. Cooper Kupp obviously being the primary one by a mile, that I do think there's enough upside to want to play him at 1% ownership, because the other quarterbacks that we have at 1% ownership this weekend, it's Heineke, it's PJ Walker, and that's it. Those are the 1% guys. That is who Matthew Stafford is in the same ownership group with. So has he been good this year? No, but it's pretty crazy they've gotten to a point where this is the third lowest owned quarterback on the entire slate.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think he's clearly got that upside, and obviously, yeah, as we were saying, he's shown that downside as well of throwing multiple interceptions in a game. But he's got the weapons. He has had that upside in the past. I mean, they are coming off a Super Bowl win, so we know that it's in his range of outcomes to have a really big game, even against this Niners defense. So yeah, pretty easy to get over the field there too.
Yeah, and I mean, looking through this, there's going to be some guys that I've mixed in with smaller amounts of exposure, but looking at our top stacks, though, I think this is probably going to be one of the more concentrated slates I have at the QB position, because it does look like even some of the more popular QBs are going under-owned, and it's guys we've already talked about. So the Dolphins with Tua, the Eagles with Jalen Hurts, the Vikings with Kirk Cousins there. These are all teams that are going massively under-owned right now in our top stack tool. And I'm kind of cool with having a little bit of a tighter core group of QBs and then mixing in some other guys who I get to like 2-3% of here and there. But I think I'm going to be a little bit tighter at quarterback this week. Is that how it looks like it's going to shape up for you as well?
Yeah, I think these are the quarterbacks I'm going to be playing. Just the ones that I listed: Tua, Cousins, Hurts, Stafford, Carr, Murray, Prescott, Ellinger, which sounds like a lot of quarterbacks, but it is tighter than I usually play. I'm not really one to limit my player pool in general, but yeah, this could be a week where I actually do limit my player pool at quarterback specifically and just focus on stacks with these 8 quarterbacks.
And it's not even something I would do intentionally, just because the first thing I do when I'm building lineups in Fantasy Cruncher is I set my stack rules, and then I set my QB exposures, and I kind of see where everything falls into place also. So if I have QBs that are just going under-owned in our boom bust tool and in the top stacks tool, if I'm setting their exposure to a certain level in Fantasy Cruncher, it's not me naturally taking quarterbacks out. It's going to give me a tighter core group of QBs when the lineups get built. Just kind of out of curiosity, is that kind of where you end up starting as well as setting some of the rules in Fantasy Cruncher and then setting QB exposures?
Funny you asked that. So I actually just suggested to Chris and Nolan yesterday. I've had several people ask me, because I've been doing these Fantasy Cruncher videos for showdown slates. I've had several people ask me, have you done any videos for full slates? And so I reached out to Chris and Nolan and said, hey, I'm willing to do one of these. I'm not going to do it every week, but I'm willing to set one up this week. And yeah, so next Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, the plan is for me to get in and make a Fantasy Cruncher video. Maybe it'll come out on Thursday for the next main slate. But that is the first place I start. I go in and I set some stacking rules, and I set several different groups, but I start with, or not groups, it's in the stacking rules, but generally I start with, quarterback with at least 2 wide receivers or tight ends, and then I exclude certain teams from that group to make different groups where I only want to have one, or I want to include running backs in that group. I make a few different kinds of groups depending on the teams, but generally that is a starting point for me, is setting those positional stacks within Fantasy Cruncher, so that I, have rules. And then that really changes when you're choosing your quarterback. You hear people say it all the time. The quarterback is the least important part of your stack. But at the same time, that quarterback, because I am typically requiring 2 pass catchers for the majority of them, and then also a run back, that really does affect your entire build.
Yeah. And it's funny because apparently we do all the same things in Fantasy Cruncher and kind of in the same order also. I also, while I'm doing it, because number one, I think it's fun, but also I get bored when I'm just putting the rules in Fantasy Cruncher sometimes. So I like to do crunches in between each thing I do, just out of curiosity to see which players I get to. And then I run the next crunch with more of the rule set in, see like, oh, how did this change my exposures? I just feel like it gives me a better concept of the slate overall and who projects well and players to get to. And then I start to other stuff where I'm incorporating some of the ownership a little more heavily and just seeing how things, get weighted and where I think that's going to ultimately lead the field to going to. So, everybody should go check out not only Neil's video that he's going to be doing upcoming with Fantasy Cruncher. Looks like next week you said you're going to be doing that.
Yeah, this coming week, I think Wednesday,
Okay.
I'm probably going to record it.
Okay, very cool. But then also Neil also does all his showdown videos, and his showdown article, which is all invaluable piece of content, and it's free. So you guys should be checking that out for sure. Anything else that you want to talk about when it comes to the QBs this weekend?
No, I think we touched on every quarterback that I plan on having any real significant exposure to.
Okay, let's move on over to the running backs then. And some value at running back this weekend. The one that is going to stand out the most that I think we should start our discussion around is going to be Tony Pollard. There is expected to be no Zeke Elliott for the Dallas Cowboys this weekend. As a result, Tony Pollard, massively popular this weekend. He is expected to be the most popular running back by a mile. So, for example, over on DraftKings, Tony Pollard is projected for 33% ownership. The next highest is Alvin Kamara at 18% projected ownership. And then over on FanDuel, we have Tony Pollard projected for an even more insane 46% projected ownership, and Alvin Kamara at 20% projected ownership. So we're looking at Pollard about twice as popular as any other running back on both FanDuel and DraftKings. What do you make of all this ownership going to him?
Yeah, I mean, it's warranted. You just look at our tools, and we have positive leverage on Tony Pollard. He's 6,100, no DAC. We've got as you said, 33.2% projected ownership, 46.6% chance of being in the optimal lineup, 37.6% chance of booming. So any way you look at it, we've just got some positive leverage on Tony Pollard, playing against the Bears defense that's been pretty bad against the rush, 24th in terms of rush DVOA. He also, will be involved in the passing game. What else can you really say? The Cowboys have a 26.25 implied team total. There's a 10-point spread in that game currently. So, that kind of benefits the running back when the team is favored, more likely to rush the ball a little bit more. It's hard not to really like Tony Pollard in this spot. Really the only negative thing you can say about Tony Pollard is that he hasn't shown much upside for a 25 rush kind of game. That's not really within his range of outcomes, but I think that he's involved enough. I think 20 carries and 6 targets is within his range of outcomes, and at 6,100 against this Bears defense, that's going to be plenty for him.
Kind of reminds me of the spot last week for Josh Jacobs. Remember, we're breaking down the slate. Josh Jacobs is expected to be massively popular, and we're looking at all the data on the sites like, yeah, he should be, and it was somebody we both agreed that despite all the ownership going to him, the big favorites that were at home, great matchup against the Houston Texans, that we felt we kind of had to play Josh Jacobs in tournaments despite all the ownership. I feel the same way about Tony Pollard this week. And also just some more information for people. We have Pollard projected to be the highest scoring running back this weekend of any running back. And I'm not saying points per dollar, just raw fantasy points. We have him number 1. He's projected for 22 fantasy points on DraftKings right now, 19 on FanDuel. That leads all running backs. The next closest player is Josh Jacobs on both FanDuel and DraftKings, and he's considerably more expensive than Tony Pollard. I find him to be an unavoidable piece of chalk this weekend. I'll be playing a whole bunch of Tony Pollard. But what do you make of some of the other chalk pieces, starting with Alvin Kamara, who we just mentioned is also being really popular? Because on one hand, we've got Tony Pollard projected for a whole lot of ownership and positive leverage, but Alvin Kamara projected for a lot of ownership, not quite as much, but still a lot, but a lot of negative leverage going to Alvin Kamara. So what do you make of him as a chalk option?
Yeah, so it's a great spot against a Raiders defense that's 30th against the pass. Obviously Alvin Kamara is involved there, 20th against the rush. So it's a very good spot. The Saints have a 24 implied team total. A lot to like about Alvin Kamara, but the ownership does look a little bit too much. And then also the price tag, I should mention, the 7,100 seems fairly low for Alvin Kamara. I feel like that's lower than he typically is. So his price has come down a bit. But as you said, there is that negative leverage, 18.5% projected ownership, 10.5% chance to be an optimal. I think that might be a little bit of that Taysom Hill effect that they don't give him the ball, at the end, at the 1 yard line, like you might expect with Alvin Kamara. They go to Taysom Hill and do weird things instead of going to Alvin Kamara. So that does hurt his upside a little bit. But would it shock anybody if they do give him those opportunities? I think that's certainly just because they have been more likely to go to Taysom Hill in the red zone doesn't mean that they can't give the ball. He's obviously their most talented skill player, or maybe not obviously, but I think that he's certainly in that conversation. I think he's probably their most talented skill player. So at 7,100, the price is hard not to like. It's just a matter of, are they going to use him the way that we think that they should? Do we know who's starting at quarterback? Because that actually makes a big difference as well. I think they did name Dalton already.
Yeah,
And
by the way, Winston's apparently healthy, and they've just decided that Dalton's the better option, which is absolutely insane. It says a lot about what they think about Jameis Winston. Last year, Taysom Hill starting quarterback over him. This year, just Andy Dalton. Maybe Winston actually isn't healthy, but why would they say he is? But yeah, it seems
weird.
like Dalton's just the guy.
Yeah, and that helps Alvin Kamara a good amount. He does target Dalton does target Alvin Kamara a lot more than Jameis Winston did early in the year. So that helps Alvin Kamara, having that upside with the running. I get the ownership makes sense to me. My guess is I'll be close to the field, maybe a little bit under, just because of that negative leverage, because there are some other running backs who we can find some positive leverage on. But it definitely, I get why people want to go there. And I think I'm going to be playing, a fair amount as well.
So I think I also have a little bit of a case here as I'm looking through the running backs against Sam Ehlinger. If you look at all of the most expensive running backs that we have this weekend, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Dalvin Cook, all 5 of them are negatively leveraged right now. We have all of them being overowned in tournaments. So if we're playing a lot of Ehlinger at quarterback, presumably, at least in part, it would be to spend up at some spot, probably running back. If that's the case, we're just getting to a lot of guys that look like they're picking up more ownership than they should. So I guess this is a 2-part question. Number one, what do you make of all of the high-end running backs looking like they're a little bit too popular? And then what does it mean for Sam Ehlinger in large field tournaments as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, that all of the more expensive running backs do have negative leverage on them. I'm trying to find where, I guess Josh Jacobs is the first one who does not at 7,500. So maybe they're going overowned because of Sam Ehlinger, because we were, projecting for, although we don't have Sam Ehlinger getting to a lot of ownership currently. So I guess that's not the case. Yeah, I mean, they're getting we have a little bit of negative leverage, but it's like Derrick Henry at 16.6% projected ownership, 13.5% chance of being optimal. It's not like that's massive negative leverage. I think I'm still willing to go the route of Ehlinger with some of these higher end running backs. Saquon Barkley is 8,100, 17.6% projected ownership, 11.2% chance of being optimal. It's definitely an interesting question, though, whether that is because these guys all have negative leverage, that they don't have, the high odds of being in the optimal lineup. Our top guys are Tony Pollard at 6,100, Ramondre Stevenson is third at 6,400. We do have Josh Jacobs in there as second at 7,500, but then it's Ramondre at 6,400, Kenneth Walker at 6,500. So, 3 of our top 4 in terms of odds of being in the optimal lineup are, 6,500 or cheaper. So maybe it's not totally necessary to play Sam Ehlinger, but then you also have to look at the wide receivers who are available. Yeah. And, we've got Cooper Kupp, we've got Devontae Adams, we've got Justin Jefferson, some higher end wide receivers on this slate that we could pay up for as well. So, I don't think that it's going to stop me from playing some Sam Ehlinger, but it's definitely an interesting thought, whether the fact that so many of our running backs, so many of our better running backs are on the cheaper end, does make it seem like he's not quite as necessary as he might be on another slate.
Yeah, and I do think that's fair as well. Is just, I think Sam Ehlinger lineups. What I'm coming to as we look through this is, I'd prefer to pay up at wide receiver than I would for running back in any lineups that you're punting at QB with Ehlinger. But let's talk about the next set of most expensive running backs. I mentioned all those other guys that were a little bit negatively leveraged, but on FanDuel, Josh Jacobs is priced up to $9,000. On DK, he's at $7,500. He's still picking up ownership on both sides. And he is the one pay up option at the position that actually is negative. That is actually, that I should say is not negatively leveraged and is actually looking like he is under owned. So Josh Jacobs, we talked about it last week and how good the spot was against the Houston Texans. He's not quite as popular this weekend. But one thing we've seen from Jacobs this year, the workload is ridiculous. He's involved in the passing game. He's involved in the running game. And it doesn't matter what the score of the game is. It looks like he's game script independent just because he's able to do a little bit of everything for this team. And he's added the passing game work. And he's been crazy efficient. He's averaging well over 5 yards per carry. He's arguably been the best running back in football this year. Are you looking to go back to Josh Jacobs this weekend?
Yeah, my best ball lineups are weeping for all those running backs I took ahead of him in that like 60 to 80 range in best ball. He was not somebody I was targeting at all, and now I have major regrets. We're seeing him at 9,000. His price tag is 9,000 on FanDuel with an 18.8% ownership, and that's neutral. 18.8% chance of being in the optimal lineup. He's just been massive this year. He's been incredible, one of the best running backs in the game. And then on DraftKings, as you said, we actually have positive leverage on Josh Jacobs at 7,500 price tag. Isn't really enough for the kind of workload he's been getting and the talent that he's shown so far this year. So as you said, 18.1% projected ownership, 22.7% chance of being in the optimal lineup at 7,500. I think that this is so actually last week we both liked Josh Jacobs. I still said I think I'm going to go against the tools and be a little bit under the field on Josh Jacobs despite the positive leverage. And of course that bit me. That was a major regret of mine being below the field on Josh Jacobs. This week though, the ownership is a lot lower. That was when he was 35% projected ownership. Now we've got him at 18.1% projected ownership. I think I'm more likely to get, to the field on Josh Jacobs than I was last week. Maybe it's just a bias of mine. I can't get myself to play like 30% Josh Jacobs, which the tools would tell me I probably should. 18.1% ownership, 23% chance of being optimal. Maybe I should be getting up to 30% Josh Jacobs. I can't get myself to do it for one reason or another, but maybe that is the correct play. Maybe I'll talk myself into it by Sunday.
In 6 games this year, 633 rushing yards, 5.7 yards per rush attempt. The last 3 games for Josh Jacobs, 143 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. 154 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, 144 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns against the Denver Broncos. That was one of the things I had right last week. I had 60-something% of Josh Jacobs. I forget the exact number. If a player got hurt last week, they were one of my most rostered players, though. I have never run worse on injuries in my entire life because every player that left game, like Breece Hall, I think Hall ended up being my second most rostered running back last week. He gets off to a great start, tears his ACL. Kind of had a decent game. He 4 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown. So he got hurt. DK Metcalf was one of the most rostered wide receivers. He got hurt. And at first I was like, oh, maybe he just has to take a shit again when he's getting carted off the field. No, it was an actual injury. Amon-Ra St. Brown, concussion immediately in that game.
Man.
So my lineups had no chance last week. And I didn't even know what I would have done. Like every player just instantly got hurt. So it was not a fun slate for me, but Josh Jacobs at least salvaged some min cashes. And it looks like he's a good play again this week. So
I think it's Magic in chat says it well. Dude, he's basically CMC for 7,500. You're not wrong. He's been used like CMC. And the matchup is pretty good against the Saints defense that is a little bit overrated at this point. I think people still think of them as being an elite defense, and they just have not been so far this year. 20th against the pass, 19th against the rush in terms of DVOA. So it's a decent enough spot for Josh Jacobs. The Raiders have a 25.5 implied team total. And yeah, he's been used like CMC. So that's a valid point. Maybe that's how I talk myself into it. I just take the name away from it and just say, no, it's Christian McCaffrey at 7,500.
What you have to do is you have to take a Sharpie mark and you write over your phone and you just change. So when you look at your phone, when you're scrolling through the app, it says Christian McCaffrey instead of Josh Jacobs. And then you feel good about clicking on him. But for sure, the targets are there. The rushing attempts are there. Just the touches per game, 23, 26, 33. 18, 20. It's an insane workload. So yeah, the floor and the ceiling is so high when he's getting that many touches, and some of it's coming through the air as well. But who are the other running backs that are priorities for you? Is there anybody that you're looking to punt with at the position? Any really cheap plays that stand out?
That's an interesting question. Hang on one second. Let me sort differently here. And am I on DraftKings? Yes. Okay. Punt running backs who look interesting to me. What are we calling a punt here? Tyler Algier looks good at 5,400. I don't know if he qualifies quite as a punt, but Good spot for Tyler Algier coming in at 3.1% ownership, 6.6% chance of being optimal in a game that the Falcons are favored. One of the few games this year where the Falcons are going to be favored against the Panthers defense. They are 13th against the rush, so they haven't been terrible against the rush, but also 22nd against the pass. It's looking like a good spot for Tyler Algier. I think he'll be somebody that I'll probably be above the field on just because he's getting such low ownership. I don't know how much I'm going to get to Jamal Williams with DeAndre Swift back. He is still involved plenty with DeAndre Swift back. He's 6,000 in that matchup with Miami. Miami's defense is also bad. And, I love to target those games where it's just two bad defenses and offenses that at least have the upside to put up some fantasy points. I like those spots. Maybe I'll get to a little bit of Jamal Williams. Maybe I'll even get to a little bit of DeAndre Swift, although he has some pretty negative leverage in our tools. I think those are kind of fragile projections. We just don't know what the workload is going to look like in DeAndre Swift's first game back. So I think both of those guys are in play. Deontay Foreman, a guy that we have to mention with Chuba Hubbard ruled out already. He's 5,300 coming in at 12.6% ownership, 12.5% chance of booming, and then 5.7% chance of being in the optimal lineup. So he does have some negative leverage there, but he's going to be in my player pool. I don't know if I'll get to where the field is at on Deontay Foreman, but I think that I will at least be playing some Deontay Foreman. Miles Sanders, not a punt, but a guy who I have some interest in against this Pittsburgh defense. I'm struggling to find real punts here that I like. Are there any punts that you love?
No, and that was kind of going to be my point here is that
Okay.
I really like the mid-range at running back a lot this week. If I'm paying up, depending what we're really considering a pay up, I do think Josh Jacobs is the best option. Then more in the mid-range, Tony Pollard pretty clearly the best option. Although FanDuel, Tony Pollard's kind of a punt at 6,200 based on how their pricing is. But the other guy in the mid-range I like getting to, Eno Benjamin. So we saw James Connors. He was ruled out again for this weekend. The expectation was that he was going to be available to play. That is no longer going to be the case. Benjamin's been pretty high variance. We've seen the good out of him. We've also seen the game where he was, $4,800 on DraftKings and was crazy.
Against the Seattle defense. Yeah.
Yeah, and just absolutely busted in what was the easiest of easy spots. But at the same time, too, I think maybe that's weighing on people. He's only projected for 5% ownership this weekend. I think there's upside in him. The floor is very low. That's evident. We've seen that before. But in terms of upside, they use him in the red zone. There's PPR upside, and that's going to be relevant for both, DraftKings and FanDuel, where just because his price point isn't all that high on either site. So I like him at low ownership because I know what the ceiling looks like.
Yeah, I was actually just about to, I was just scrolling through and had just noticed, oh yeah, Benjamin. I forgot James Conner is out in this game. He looks great at 6,000, 5.6% projected ownership, 9.4% chance of being in the optimal lineup. And yeah, his floor is low, but in GPPs, we don't really care about floor. All we really care about is the ceiling outcome, and he clearly has that ceiling within his range of outcomes. The Cardinals have a 22.75 implied team total. Vikings defense has not been great this year, 21st against the pass, 21st against the rush in terms of DVOA. So yeah, it's a great spot for Eno Benjamin, and if the field's not getting there, I'm going to be playing a good amount.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. So in terms of, I think Josh Jacobs is good chalk, clearly not nearly as chalky as last week, but there's a bunch of running backs who are kind of around 20% owned. Of those guys, I think Josh Jacobs is the best. The chalk at the position, Tony Pollard, I think that's warranted chalk. And I think my favorite contrarian play at the position is Eno Benjamin overall. He's somebody that I like getting to really low ownership, 6% owned on 6,000 on DraftKings with 5% ownership, and then 7,000 over on FanDuel. Are there any other running backs that are really standing out to you, or have we kind of covered it at this point?
Yeah, I think we've covered running backs pretty well at this point. You can play some Kenneth Walker is 6,500 against the Giants defense, 16.5% projected ownership, 18.7% chance of being optimal. He looks good. Ramondre Stevenson looks really good. 15.9% projected ownership, 20.5% chance of being in the optimal lineup at 6,400. So those are the guys. We touched on them a little bit, talking about just the high end and how the guys with the highest optimal odds have relatively low salaries. So those guys look good. And then the high end, I will be paying up some for Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor. I think they all look fine enough. They all have a little bit of negative leverage, but not so much that I'm going to like full fade them. I'm probably going to be getting to some of those high end guys. And as we mentioned, you can get to them easier because we've got, we don't have all of the high end quarterbacks on the slate. So it makes it a little bit easier to, see the potential for a mid-range quarterback or or Sam Ehlinger to be in the optimal lineup. It's just a little bit more likely when you don't have all of the high-end quarterbacks on the slate. So I could see myself paying up in some of these spots as well.
Yeah, and we're going to get to those wide receivers in a second. But first, shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. If you guys haven't signed up at Prize Picks yet, you should do by signing up by clicking on the link in the description box below, because when you use that link, you get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And over at Stokastic.com, we've got all the tools that you need to build winning player prop cards. Over at Prize Picks, we've got over-under specific for Prize Picks props. So it's going to give you the projected odds of each prop to win. And you take some of those props, you put them together. A good way to turn some profit over on Prize Picks. But also sign up by clicking on that link below so you get that $100 bonus when you're signing up for the first time. Now let's talk about the wide receivers. And, you know, as far as the spend up running backs go, not to say they were unplayable, but it did look like they were a little bit overowned. As far as the pay up wide receiving options go, if I'm paying up for skill position players, I prefer the spend up wideouts to the spend up running backs. Cooper Kupp, you and I have talked about it many times. If you have the salary, you pay up for Cooper Kupp on DraftKings or FanDuel. He's the highest floor and ceiling of any player going in DFS. But then also, there's Justin Jefferson. Devontae Adams is sick, so we do need a little bit of an update there. I presume he'll be okay to go, but there's also Tyreek Hill. He's going to make sense in our Tua lineups. Who's your preference to spend up for at wide receiver?
I'm probably going to be playing a good amount of Viking stacks against this Cardinals defense. So it might be Justin Jefferson coming in at 12.8% ownership, 16.8% chance of being optimal, 18.2% chance of booming. The Vikings have a 26.25 implied team total. As we said, Cardinals 27th in terms of pass DVOA. They have been a little bit better against wide receiver ones, but Justin Jefferson's a guy who can do it against anybody. So I think it's probably Justin Jefferson, just in terms of ownership and boom potential and the matchup. It's a close call, though. I really like all of these guys. And we've talked about how much we like Tua stacks. Tyreek Hill's coming in at 8,500, 20.7% projected ownership, 20.1% chance of being in the optimal lineup. He's certainly somebody I'm going to be getting to a good amount. It's really hard for me to differentiate. I think it's going to come down to who's my quarterback in a given build, because I'm playing all of these guys at the top have quarterbacks that I like as well. Cooper Kupp, I'm playing Matthew Stafford. Justin Jefferson, I'm playing Kirk Cousins. Devontae Adams, I'm playing some Derek Carr. Tyreek Hill, I'm playing Tua. AJ Brown, I'm playing Jalen Hurts. So I'm only playing 8 quarterbacks this week, I think. And among the top guys, all of them can be paired with those quarterbacks. So it really depends on the matchup. It's hard for me to really say that I have a favorite among these guys. It kind of depends on the lineup.
Is this the most expensive the wide receiver position has ever been? I can't remember a slate where there's this many wide receivers that were this expensive. So DK, 9,600 Cooper Kupp, 9,100 Justin Jefferson, 86 for Devontae Adams, 85 for Tyreek Hill. Then talking about FanDuel, I'll pull up the pricing over there because I know it's also pretty steep, starting with Cooper Kupp, who's at 9,300. Then Diggs is on the main slate, never mind. Justin Jefferson, 9,000, Tyreek Hill, 8,700, Devontae Adams, 85. Am I misremembering something, or is this as expensive as the wide receiver position has ever been?
Yeah, it's fairly expensive. And yeah, we're missing Stephon Diggs. What other expensive wide receivers? I guess nobody from Green Bay really. Yeah, we're not missing too many of the high end wide receivers. It doesn't really stand out to me as being that crazy. I mean, we've seen Cooper Kupp at, I think he was at 9,900 at one point this year, but we haven't really seen too many slates with multiple wide receivers. I don't know if we've seen any with multiple above 9,000 so far this year. So yeah, maybe I guess they're a little bit more expensive. Didn't stand out to me, but maybe you're right that this is a little bit higher end, more in the higher end that we're used to seeing.
And then we start to get into the mid-range of wide receivers. So just talking about the next tier of guys, once we're getting past the players that are priced in the 9K and the 7 to 8K range, who are the players in the 6K range that are really standing out as being a little bit more cost efficient options at wide receiver that you want to get to?
I mean, I talked about how I like stacks with Kirk Cousins. Adam Thielen hasn't really done it that much this year, but if you want to buy into the narrative that the Cardinals are going to be, double teaming Justin Jefferson, maybe Adam Thielen is a little bit more viable. 6,200 against that same bad Cardinals pass defense, 6.2% projected ownership. So I think that I'm going to like some Adam Thielen at 6,200. Robert Woods has been looking pretty great in our tools. I guess he's 5,400. So if we're sticking to the 6,000 range, Who else? Tyler Lockett looks pretty good. We don't know DK Metcalf's status, I don't think yet. My guess is DK Metcalf is going to be out. I think Tyler Lockett was also questionable though last I
Yeah,
saw.
it's a mess. So we've got, and generally when players are listed as questionable in football, I tend to think they're more likely to play than not,
Yep.
because part of it is how the NFL's injury reporting goes. Because what was it, 3 or 4 years ago, the NFL did away with the probable, questionable, doubtful tags like we have in the NBA, and now everybody's listed as questionable. So just think, when you look at an injury report for basketball, for instance, if somebody's a little dinged up, the majority of them just get listed as probable. Those guys all get thrown into the questionable bucket for football. So maybe this is a real injury for Tyler Lockett. He practiced this week, but it was limited. He's listed as questionable. It seems to me he's more likely to play than not. And to the point that I think you were getting at, if DK Metcalf doesn't play, Tyler Lockett would look really strong and obviously a lot of upside.
Yeah, exactly. He'll look better if he's playing and DK is out. I think Tyler Lockett's going to look really good this weekend. There's nobody that has a lot of positive leverage in that 6,000 range. There are just a bunch of guys who look a little bit negative or neutral. Jalen Waddle. I mean, we talked about how much we like those Tua stacks coming in at 6,700. I'll be playing some Jalen Waddle. 13.2% projected ownership, 12.8% chance of being the optimal. Very, very neutral there. I'm okay with that. Devontae Smith looking slightly overowned, but again, it's not by any huge margin. He's only coming in at 6.2% projected ownership, 5.2% chance of being in the optimal lineup. I'm going to be playing some Devontae Smith in my Hurts lineups and maybe some without Hurts as well. I'm surprised to see Brandon Ayuk coming in with only a 1.4% chance of being in the optimal lineup with Debo out this week. I would have thought that would come out. We have Debo in still. So maybe that's something we need to update in the tools. My guess is that Brandon Ayuk at 6,100 is going to look better once we account for the fact that Debo is out. Not the best matchup in the world against the Rams, 14th in terms of pass DVOA, but Brandon Ayuk becomes a wide receiver 1 for the Niners. I think that he's certainly going to be viable at 6,100. And then Chris Olave coming in at 16% projected ownership, 13.3% chance of being in the optimal lineup. I think Olave looks pretty decent as well. I never really know what to make of Terry McLaurin. I've been playing him a lot. I guess he had a good game last weekend. Was it last weekend? I feel like he had a very good game. So it did finally work out for us. Maybe we can keep targeting him at low ownership. 3% projected ownership looks pretty fair for Terry McLaurin. Maybe I'll go there as well.
Yeah, so there's clearly a lot of talent in Terry McLaurin. It's just the quarterback situation's been a nightmare this year. Wentz, it looked like Wentz was going to be a fantasy monster through 2 games of the year. Remember when he's throwing the ball like 50 times per game?
Yeah.
And then it went downhill so quickly for him and everything fell apart. But there are some good value options, I think, at wide receiver this weekend. And one that really stands out to me is Wendell Robinson. The Giants are so banged up at wide receiver, and they've been a competent team this year. And one thing that I think helps a receiver like Wendell Robinson is the Giants to really try to limit the amount of mistakes, the turnovers that Daniel Jones has been an issue for him over the first couple years of his NFL career. Number one, they've had him run a lot more this year, but they've also been just trying to cater their offense to throw a lot more shorter passing routes. So that would be really beneficial to a guy like Wendell Robinson, who from a PPR perspective last week, he was targeted 8 times. He caught 6 passes for 50 yards. He was a little more favorable looking on DraftKings than FanDuel. But this could be a guy, especially with Kadarius Toney out of the picture now. And I know that Toney wasn't playing before, but I do think it speaks to how the Giants kind of want to build around Robinson right now going forward. I think that Robinson is somebody who could be a really strong PPR play for the foreseeable future for the Giants, because they just don't really have other guys to throw to.
Yeah, I actually, Wendell Robinson was the guy that I was planning on bringing up. Yeah, only 4,700. He seems to be potentially the wide receiver 1 for the Giants. At this point, they no longer have to worry about Kadarius Toney. Kenny Golladay doesn't look like he's going to be a thing this year. RIP best ball lineups. I think Wendell Robinson is the guy for the Giants. 7.4% projected ownership, 9.5% chance of being optimal. I thought about bringing up Daniel Jones when we were talking about quarterbacks as somebody that maybe I'd play, just because going up against this bad Seattle defense, Daniel Jones has some rushing upside. Maybe I would think about throwing in a couple Daniel Jones to Wandale Robinson skinny stacks. The only thing I don't like about it is massive negative leverage in our top stacks to one of the most negatively leveraged plays. 5.7% projected ownership, 1.4% chance of the Giants having the top stack. So it's a little bit hard to get to from a top stacks perspective, but maybe with the skinny stack, I could see it working out with no real high end options this week. Daniel Jones has had high upside weeks in the past. He can rush, he can throw, just skinny stacking with Wandale Robinson. I don't hate that as a play despite the negative leverage. Maybe I'll go there a little bit. We also have several people asking about AJ Brown in chat. And yeah, I like AJ Brown. I think we skipped over him. Didn't talk about him much, but yeah, it's a great spot for AJ Brown. 7,700. We have him projected for 6.5% ownership, 7.3% chance of being in the optimal lineup. You can certainly do some skinny stacks with Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown. The question, do you think you'll do any double stacks this weekend with Jalen Hurts, with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, or some other pass catcher?
The thing that's tough about forcing double stacks with Jalen Hurts is that he's such a good running quarterback that it's just within the realm of outcomes, and not even an unlikely one, that if they were to score, say, 3 or 4 touchdowns, that 1 or 2 of them would be with Jalen Hurts running the football. So I'll be making groups where I'll be giving a boost to AJ Brown and Devontae Smith with Jalen Hurts, but I'm not going to force double stacks. And I know you're laughing at the same thing as me right now, where we had the guy in chat shows up. He's like, I'm leaving. You guys are talking too much. What are we supposed to do on a show? Are we sign language? I don't even know how else we're supposed to convey information other than if it's not talking. But
so I just hid him from the channel, which he was on the contrary, insulting our guest yesterday. Not a valuable member of the Stokastic audience. So I've blocked him from the channel.
I mean, it's interesting to me. Like, why listen to a show if you don't want to hear people talk? I don't know.
That's weird. He wants us to be building lineups, I think is what he was saying. That's weird. I don't know.
Puppets? Should we do puppets from now on? We just
shadow
puppets.
Yeah,
we could do that as well. But anyway, getting back to the so Jalen Hurts. So what I was saying is I'm certainly going to make sure there's at least one wide receiver. I'm not going to force double stacks. I'll give it a boost so it'll come up more frequently over the course of lineups. But I do think that double stacking and forcing it is probably suboptimal because of his rushing ability.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. It's not something that I'm likely to double stack a ton, maybe in a smaller field GPP. I think the upside is there for the double stack just because the receivers are so talented and both are, home run threats any given week. So I don't hate the double stack, but yeah, it's probably not something I'm forcing this weekend.
And then as for the other wide receivers, is there anything else that really stands out to you at the position? For me, my favorite value option and my favorite contrarian option is Wendell Robinson, not projected to be very popular right now. And then obviously cheap right now. That is not going to change. But any other real value options at wide receiver that you want to get to?
Yeah, so real value, that is a good question. Well, before we get to real value, I mean, Michael Pittman. So just because we talked about Sam Ehlinger, Michael Pittman actually looks pretty good of those high-end guys. 2.8% projected ownership, 5.3% chance of being optimal. Alec Pierce coming in at 1.6% projected ownership. He's 4,600. I think that qualifies as a value option. 1.6% projected ownership, 3.8% chance of being optimal. So we actually have some positive leverage on these indie receivers. So, if you want to stack Sam Ehlinger with one of these guys, I'd probably be more inclined to do a skinny stack because I don't think he's going to have a, 4 touchdown passing game. But I think that these guys are viable in skinny stacks with Sam Ehlinger. Devontae Parker looks okay at 4,400, 3.7% chance of being in the optimal lineup, only 1% projected ownership. Terrace Marshall, I don't really know that I love that. He does have Terrace Marshall has positive leverage, just standing out in the tools, 2.7% ownership, 5.7% chance of being in the optimal lineup. I don't know how often I'm going to get there, but maybe I guess it's easy enough to get over the field. If, Fantasy Cruncher gives me a little bit over the field, I'm not going to fight it. Noah Brown, we talked about, I'm going to be playing some DAX stacks. Noah Brown is 4,300 coming in at 2.8% projected ownership, 6.4% chance of being optimal. No, 3K receivers are, really standing out to me in any meaningful way. Trent Sherfield, actually somebody brought up Trent Sherfield earlier as somebody that we could consider playing. We're playing some Miami stacks. Trent Sherfield is 3,000. We have some positive leverage on it. 3.4% projected ownership, 3.6% chance of being in the optimal lineup. So a little bit of positive leverage on Trent Sherfield. I think that is a fine play. Maybe I'll go there a little bit. But nobody's standing out as massive positive leverage among these cheap guys.
Yeah. So the other player I think that we should talk about before we move on from the wide receivers is DJ Moore, who another player who I ended up being one of the few players I rostered last week that didn't get hurt, that I was overweight to, that worked out for me. DJ Moore has gone from being totally unowned and everybody thinking he sucks to his price going way up and his ownership going way up. And I get that we also have a way higher projection on DJ Moore this week as well, to where he's 6,200 he's 6,200 on FanDuel, projected for right around 12 fantasy points. He's the third most popular wide receiver over on FanDuel. For DraftKings, he is projected for 20% ownership, the second most popular wide receiver behind Tyreek Hill. Do you think this might be a little bit of an overreaction to one good game from DJ Moore? Because it's hard for me to think that a guy should be going from totally unowned and fairly poorly projected, just unanimously being considered one of the top wide receiver plays.
Maybe a little bit of an overreaction, but our tools seem to like him too on DraftKings
Yeah.
in particular. 20.2% projected ownership, 20.6% chance of being optimal. We talked about him last week as being viable, and we got some pushback in chat. Somebody told me, Neil, you're better than this. You can't win a milli with DJ Moore. Then he had a very good game. I don't know if he was actually in the milli lineup. So maybe the point stands that you can't. But 5,300, I think DJ Moore, 100 yards receiving and a touchdown is within his range of outcomes. And at 5,300, you're going to be very happy with that. So maybe the ownership is a little bit high, although the tools don't suggest that it is. He looks pretty good in the tools. Although on the other hand, 20.2% ownership, 12.9% chance of hitting a boom score. So from that standpoint, it's negative leverage. Depends what you want to look at, but looks like a pretty neutral play to me. I don't know that I'm going to be going above the field on DJ Moore necessarily at 20% ownership. I don't know. Do you think 35 fantasy points is in his range of outcome? I don't know that you need it. 30 fantasy points, I could see it. Honestly, DJ Moore is their wide receiver one by a pretty good margin against a Falcons defense that is pretty bad. I think it makes some sense to go to DJ Moore.
I do too. I'm going to get exposure to him. I am fairly certain I'm going to end up being underweight to the field on him because I just knowing how, projections work. And I know a lot of people are going to be giving him more of a target. His quarterback is still PJ Walker though. And PJ Walker last week, and I bet the over on his passing yardage prop, it hit pretty easily, but it was 152.5. It was an absurdly low number. And there is a part of me that's still like, all right, I think DJ Moore is terrific. I don't think PJ Walker is. And there's still the issue of the quarterback has to deliver the ball to the wide receiver. And if PJ Walker plays bad, it just DJ Moore is shit out of luck. So at over 20% ownership, I would be very surprised if I'm overweight or even neutral to the field on him, even if he projects like he should be in the boom bust tool. I think that he just might be universally over projected because of how good his game was last week. And because he has a track record, at least in previous years, of being good. He's been terrible the rest of the season from a fantasy perspective. It hasn't been his fault, but the quarterback situation's been bad, and the quarterback situation is still bad.
What are you talking about? XFL legend, PJ Walker and a quarterback. No, but I mean, Atlanta secondary. A lot of people point out in chat, Atlanta secondary is terrible. So that is a point in his favor. But I hear what you're saying. DJ Moore has not been great overall this season. He's had good spots previously and just has not really gotten it done. So I think it's reasonable to be under the field. As I said, I think I see him as basically a neutral play at 20%. I don't know that I'm getting too far above or below the field on DJ Moore. He just looks like a pretty good play. A lot of people are bringing up Van Jefferson, who I talked about when we were talking about Matt Stafford stacks as somebody who I think is viable at the minimum 3K floor price. He has shown upside in the past for big games. So I think I do think that Van Jefferson is an interesting play. He doesn't look great in our tools, which is why I had not brought him up yet. It was kind of missing him, but yeah, just from a thinking about football standpoint and him coming back, we don't know what his role is going to be. Somebody asked, is he going to take over that wide receiver 2 role? I kind of doubt it, but wouldn't be crazy. Allen Robinson has not been very good this year, so he could. I think that Van Jefferson is a guy that I'm going to go to some at 3,000. Somebody wanted to ask us about the House of Dragon finale because we've been talking too much. I liked it. I thought it was a great finale.
I loved it. I mean, you and I have DM'd a little bit. I love the show. It's one of my favorite. I know it's only one season in, and also I know the source material, so I know where it's going and how it ends. They're taking a little. I really enjoy the show very much. So Mark Smith, I like it a lot, and Neil likes it as well. I think maybe a little bit less than me though. Or have you turned a little bit more?
I mean, I did. I love the big scene that is on everybody's mind. I'm not going to say what it is. I did wish that there was a little bit more character development going into it. But I'm not going to say anything further. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who has not gotten there. I will say I saw the name Mark Smith and I was like, oh, but it's Matt Smith. Matt Smith is the actor on House of the Dragon. So not the guy I was thinking.
That would be really funny if it was just the actor randomly popping. I was like, what do you guys think of my show?
Popping into random chats on YouTube. Yeah.
It's better than your movie Morbius, which sucked. Super chat from D Owens 89. Gallup and Traquan feel like awesome GPP pivots. So, Gallup's kind of interesting because he's coming off the ACL injury, kind of slowly getting worked in. He's only projected for 1% ownership. We have him with a 1% chance to be optimal. But I mean, there's reason to think there's upside there just because he was so good prior to getting hurt. We haven't seen him get to that level this year, but a lot has been working against him. Cooper Rush was his quarterback. He was returning from injury. I do think eventually Michael Gallup is going to look healthy and be the wide receiver too for the team. We just haven't seen it yet. But between Michael Gallup or I assume he means Traquan Smith and not Tyquan Thornton.
He meant Traquan Smith, yeah.
Yeah. So between those two, it's hard for me to get behind Traquan when Andy Dalton is his quarterback, but I can make a case for Gallup.
Yeah, I'd say Gallup is the stronger play there. Yeah, as you said, 5,000 playing some Dak. I think he makes some sense in some Dak stacks as well. Maybe as a one-off, I guess you could do, but 1.4% projected ownership, 0.9% optimal. You know, that's at that range of like, it's very neutral. I don't really care if you're playing that stack. I think he makes some sense. I don't know that I'll get to him a ton as a one-off, but he's not going to be, he'll be in my player pool. My guess is at that 1.4% ownership, I could see myself getting to above the field on Michael Gallup. He's at least interesting to me. So yeah, I think it's an interesting shout out, but Traquan Smith, I think he's a wide receiver 3 for New Orleans. I think Marquez Callaway has passed him. So I think of those New Orleans secondary, tertiary options, Marquez Callaway is the one that I'd be more inclined to go to. He actually has positive leverage, 2.9% projected ownership, 4% chance of being in the optimal lineup. So, and at 3,700, he's the more interesting play to me of those New Orleans guys.
We have a deal going on right now with BetMGM. If you guys don't have an account there, there's a way to sign up and basically get $200 for free. This is all you have to do to take advantage of the offer. You click on the link below in the description box. And then when you place a $10 bet on any NBA money line, it pays out $200 when there's a 3-pointer hit in the game, which is going to happen. It's basically a no-brainer bet. There's never been an NBA game in my lifetime that didn't have a 3-pointer hit. And then you take that $200 and you know what you do with it. You put it on Taysom Hill to score a touchdown because he scores whenever Alvin Kamara is chalk. Apparently, that's just a thing that happens. Taysom Hill steals all of Alvin Kamara's touchdowns, but it's $200 for free basically from BetMGM. When you're signing up, just make sure to click on the link below in the description box to get credited with that $200 when there's a 3-pointer hit in the game. Now, Neil, let's move on over to the tight end position, which is really a mess this week because typically we have Travis Kelce at tight end, not this week. Typically, we have Mark Andrews at tight end, not this week. So what are we doing at this position?
We're doing what we do every week. We just burn money on Kyle Pitts. He looks the best in the. I mean, I say that jokingly, but I'm probably playing Kyle Pitts again. 8.1% projected ownership, 18.1% chance of being in the optimal lineup. I'm gonna keep making that same mistake until I have no more money left to play on Kyle Pitts. Are you gonna be going to any Kyle Pitts?
Yeah, just based on talent, he's 4,000. It's a good matchup for them as well. You know, you look at Marcus Mariota, who, by the way, has also sucked as of late. He was kind of decent looking at the beginning of the year. And how funny is it that I believe the winner of this game between the Panthers and the Falcons is in first place in that division because the Buccaneers are also equally terrible. But you look at some of these recent games from Marcus Mariota that haven't been great. They've been terrible. And I think that's something that kind of gets lost in the Kyle Pitts talk. People are like, oh, Arthur Smith isn't using him enough as a tight end. Well, I mean, how much production can you reliably expect from Kyle Pitts when Mariota's throwing for 124 and 129 yards in the last couple of games? But here's the saving grace. The last few matchups have been difficult for this team. Bengals, the Giants, Giants. I saw San Francisco into the Giants. So the Bengals, the 49ers, the Buccaneers. This is an easier spot this weekend for the Falcons offense in a game that should be at least somewhat high scoring. And I think that does get lost also. And then, by the way, the game before that was against the Browns. So 4 games in a row that we've seen less than 150 passing yards from Marcus Mariota. I think we could see a better, I mean, it can't get worse for him, but I think there is potential for him to do better in an easier matchup. And if that's the case, guys like Drake London, Kyle Pitts could have better receiving games. And the tight end position just sucks this weekend. So I think it makes sense to be overweight to the 8% projected ownership on Kyle Pitts. And he's so cheap, right? Like he's only $4,000 over on DraftKings this weekend. On FanDuel, his price point was at, let's see, Pitts is $5,600 over on FanDuel. So we're playing him now as if he's just any other tight end. He is no real significant price tag. He isn't really picking up ownership. So yeah, just from a talent perspective, I'm cool with taking chances on him.
Yeah, and that 8% ownership, you don't need to play that much to be over the field. If you play 12%, I don't know exactly how much I'm going to be getting, but I'm going to be above that 8%. I feel confident in that. Irv Smith, somebody I mentioned earlier, I like against that Arizona defense that has been bad against tight ends. 8.3% projected ownership, 9.4% chance to be an optimal. I think again our tools, and it could just be that it's just a showing wrong on that one line, but I don't think we're accounting for Debo being out yet. So yeah. George Kittle coming in currently at 5.6% projected ownership, 5% chance of being in the optimal. My guess is that both of those numbers come up, but I'm going to be playing some George Kittle at 5,700 with no Debo. I do think that he's going to be more involved. He is one of their better playmakers. So I have some interest in George Kittle. We've talked about how much we like Stafford stacks. Tyler Higbee is 4,200. He's been very involved in the offense. I guess a little bit less so recently, but wouldn't surprise me to see them go back there. 12.2% projected ownership, 10% chance to be an optimal. So a little bit of negative leverage, but again, we're stacking that game. Dallas Goedert, a focal point for Jalen Hurts, coming in at 7.4% projected ownership, 11.8% chance to be an optimal. I'm going to be playing him in some Hurts stacks. I'll probably have him as a one-off in some places as well. And then as far as guys that just look great from a leverage standpoint, Noah Fant also looks really great for Seattle up against this Giants defense. He's only 2,800, 7.6% projected ownership, 12.8% chance to be an optimal. So he's a guy that we need to call out as looking good against this Giants defense as well.
Yeah, and I'll say, because you mentioned Dallas Goedert, if you were to ask me the one tight end that I feel the most confident about, all things considered on this slate, it would be Goddard. He's reasonably priced on both FanDuel and DraftKings, picking up some ownership, but nothing crazy, looking at single-digit ownership on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So one of the more positively leveraged tight ends we have, and he's actually played well this year. We like Jalen Hurts as a quarterback. So Goddard is somebody I think we could feel good about, honestly, where it is pretty hard to feel good about most of the tight ends. Kittle to a lesser extent. He's been so talented in the past, but he's kind of like the slightly better version of Kyle Pitts this year, just in terms of the passing game work hasn't been there. I think there's opportunity for upside in tournaments with Deebo Samuel out, but it's also hard to feel confident. So I think if the slate was to lock right now, Goddard is probably the tight end I would get the most exposure to. But other than that, I think this is another slate to be pretty spread out at the position.
Can I bring up one more name? Because I want to also bring it from a season-long standpoint. I'm in the Awesemo B League this year, and Darren Waller was dropped in the B League. And I was like, God. I have to pick up Darren Waller. And then I forgot, and somebody else picked him up. So I did not pick up Darren Waller, even though I started Isaiah Likely at tight end this week. So I'm pretty thin at tight end and still forgot to pick up Darren Waller. Is he done? What's his deal? Like, he doesn't even look that great in the tools. He's 5,400, 1.4% projected ownership. Is this a leak to not be playing Darren Waller and just hope that he regresses positively at some point? Because we have some positive, 1.4% projected ownership, 2.3% chance of being optimal. Do you think Darren Waller is coming back this year to be Darren Waller again?
So there's been a couple issues. The biggest one is just Devontae Adams demands such a big target share that it takes away from the overall workload that we've seen from him. The other thing also, he's hurt this week. He's dealing with a hamstring injury. We don't know whether he's going to play or not.
Oh, so he is questionable. Okay.
Yeah, so that's going to also play a pretty big role. And I think he's probably been hurt for most of the year. It's just not unreasonable to make that assumption when the production's been so poor.
Yeah, I think there was a game that he actually started, and then maybe it was this last game against Denver where he started and then left pretty early in the game.
KC in week 5.
Oh, is that what? Oh, yeah, that's right. He did start that game, and I didn't have a single target. So that's obviously going to scare some people off. But that's such low ownership for Darren Waller. If he is a go, I think I might play a little bit get a little bit above the field on Waller as well.
He did have the week to get healthy. Well, kind of 2 weeks, really, because the KC game, he barely plays, gets on the field, immediately gets hurt, comes out. Bye week the next week, and now they're playing the Saints, and the Saints defense has been a disappointment this week. So we'll see what happens with his health, but for sure, if he plays, if he's unrestricted and reports are that he's healthy, if it's one of those things he's going to give it a go, I'd be scared shitless to get to a lot of them. But if it's one of those things where, hey, Darren Waller, we get the tweet tonight from Schefter that all systems are a go, then yeah, I think he would make sense as a contrarian option. With that said, I assume he would come up in ownership if we get that green light as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we probably would too. I see several people talking about Josh Reynolds, or at least a couple people talking about Josh Reynolds in chat. Not somebody who's been on my radar. Just because people are talking about him now, I'm sort of interested why.
Because the Amon-Ra St. Brown injury. But it looks like St. Brown is going to play. If that's the case, then it would be hard for me to get to Reynolds. But if Amon-Ra St. Brown is out, then yeah, Reynolds would make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, we do have a little bit of positive leverage, 3.5% projected ownership, 3.8% chance of being in the optimal lineup. That's even with Amon-Ra being in. So I guess he's not something that was really on my radar, to be honest, but maybe he's an interesting bring back in those Tua stacks as well.
Yeah, and let's close it out with that. Our favorite stack of the week, and this is a pretty easy one for me. Tua, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. I'm going to be playing a lot of that trio in tournaments this weekend. I think Mike Gesicki makes sense at tight end also just because it's so hard to find tight ends that we like. I like getting the extra correlation, but I'm going to be loading up on Dolphins. Neil, if you're building one stack to build your lineups around this weekend, what would be your quarterback to pass catching combination?
Yeah, I'm going to make the homer pick here, and I'm going to go with Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson, and I'll throw Irv Smith in there. I think it's going to be those two or Adam Thielen. It's going to be Kirk Cousins with a lot of those three receiving options somewhere in my lineup.
Yep, those are the two most positively leveraged passing games and the two teams with the two top stack odds in our top stacks tool for football. So guys, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck, and I hope you guys have a great weekend.